Carl Jung discovered something about narcissists that the psychiatric establishment refused to acknowledge for decades. Behind every seemingly powerful narcissist is a psychological structure so fragile that when the empath stops playing their assigned role, the narcissist doesn't just get angry, they completely unravel. And what emerges from that unraveling reveals the truth about who they've been all along. Jung spent years studying the narcissist-empath dynamic in his clinical practice. He watched what happened when empaths finally withdrew their participation from relationships with narcissists. The transformations he documented were so dramatic that he initially questioned his own observations. The narcissists didn't just lose their temper or find new supply and move on. They underwent a psychological deterioration so complete that their entire persona crumbled. And beneath that persona, Jung found something that explained everything about why narcissists need empaths in the first place. Today I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about who the narcissist really becomes when the empath stops playing along, why this transformation is inevitable rather than circumstantial, and what this reveals about the true nature of the narcissist-empath dynamic that most people completely misunderstand. Jung observed that narcissists construct what he called a compensatory self, an elaborate psychological facade designed to hide the truth of their inner void. But this compensatory self isn't self-sustaining. It requires constant external validation to exist. And the narcissist's preferred source of that validation is someone with a specific psychological profile: an empath. The empath serves a function in the narcissist's psychological economy that goes far beyond typical relationship roles. They're not just a partner or friend or family member. They're the structural support keeping the narcissist's entire false reality from collapsing in on itself. Jung documented that most people fundamentally misunderstand what happens when an empath stops playing along. They think the narcissist gets upset temporarily, finds someone new, and life continues. They think the narcissist was never really attached anyway. They think the narcissist barely notices the empath's absence beyond losing a source of supply. But Jung found something completely different. When an empath truly withdraws, not just physically but energetically and psychologically, the narcissist undergoes a transformation that exposes the terrified child beneath the grandiose mask. And that exposure is both inevitable and irreversible once the empath has genuinely detached. The first thing Jung observed was what he called the panic phase. The moment the narcissist senses the empath is genuinely done, something shifts in their nervous system. They can feel it before the empath even says anything. The energetic withdrawal triggers an alarm in the narcissist's psyche that their entire psychological structure is under threat. This isn't because they love the empath in any conventional sense. Jung was clear about this. The narcissist has never actually seen the empath as a separate person with their own needs and reality. The narcissist has only ever related to what the empath does for them. But what the empath does for them is everything. The empath is the audience that confirms their grandiosity, the emotional container that processes feelings the narcissist can't tolerate, the mirror that reflects back an image the narcissist can live with, the stabilizing force preventing their inner emptiness from consuming them. When that stabilizing force begins to withdraw, the narcissist panics. And panic makes them do things they've never done before in the relationship. Jung documented this pattern so consistently across his patients that he could predict what would happen next. The narcissist suddenly becomes everything the empath had been begging them to be for months or years. They're attentive, they're vulnerable, they're accountable. They acknowledge problems they previously denied existed. They take responsibility they've never taken before. They promise change. They show up emotionally in ways that seem impossible given who they've been. To outside observers, and especially to the empath, this looks like a breakthrough. Finally, the narcissist is capable of growth. Finally, they see what they've been doing. Finally, the relationship might become what it was supposed to be. But Jung was adamant. This isn't growth. It's survival instinct. The narcissist hasn't changed. They've simply realized their usual tactics aren't working, and their false self is mobilizing every resource available to prevent its dissolution. Jung found that empaths in this stage experienced profound confusion. The person who had been emotionally unavailable for the entire relationship was suddenly present. The person who dismissed every concern was now validating feelings. The person who never apologized was suddenly taking full responsibility. Maybe they'd been wrong to give up. Maybe the narcissist was capable of the connection they'd been craving. Maybe this was the turning point they'd been hoping for all along. But Jung taught empaths to ask one crucial question. If the narcissist was capable of being this present, this emotionally available, this accountable, why did it take the empath leaving to activate it? Why wasn't this available when the empath was begging for basic respect and reciprocity? The answer revealed everything. The narcissist isn't choosing to show up now because they've grown or healed, or suddenly understand what they've been doing wrong. They're showing up because their psychological survival depends on the empath staying. The moment the threat passes and the empath returns, the behavior will revert, because nothing has actually integrated. Jung documented empaths who returned during this panic phase. Within days or weeks, sometimes even hours, the narcissist's behavior would snap back to previous patterns, often worse than before, because now the narcissist had confirmation that this tactic worked. That performing transformation when losing the empath would always pull them back. The second phase Jung identified was what he called the rage phase. If the empath held firm through the panic and didn't return, the narcissist's desperation would curdle into fury. And this fury revealed something most people never see: the narcissistic injury that exists at the core of their psychology. Jung understood that narcissists develop their compensatory self to avoid feeling the shame and inadequacy that exists at their core. As long as they can maintain their grandiose facade, they never have to touch that wound. But when the empath withdraws their support, the facade begins to crack, and the narcissist gets flooded with the very feelings their entire personality structure was built to avoid. This flooding doesn't make them reflective, it makes them enraged. Because in the narcissist's distorted perception, the empath is the one causing this pain, not by leaving, but by existing as a separate person with needs and boundaries that the narcissist has to acknowledge. Jung observed that the rage phase manifested in specific ways. The narcissist would begin a campaign of what he called character assassination. Unable to face their own shame, they projected all their darkness onto the empath and then attacked the empath for possessing those qualities. If the narcissist was manipulative, they'd tell everyone the empath was the manipulator. If the narcissist was abusive, they'd claim the empath was the abuser. If the narcissist was unfaithful, they'd accuse the empath of cheating. The projection was so consistent that Jung concluded it was completely unconscious. The narcissists genuinely believed their own accusations. They weren't deliberately lying, though the effect was the same. They were perceiving their own shadow in the empath and reporting that perception as objective reality. Unable to integrate their own darkness, they saw it in the person who had withdrawn their light. Jung found this phase particularly devastating for empaths because they watched the narcissist successfully rewrite history. Mutual friends believed the narcissist's version of events. Family members questioned the empath's account. The empath's reputation was systematically destroyed, while the narcissists remained intact. The narcissist would present as the victim. They'd been blindsided by someone they loved. They'd been used and discarded. They'd been giving everything to someone who was incapable of appreciation. The narrative was so convincing because the narcissist believed it completely. Jung observed that narcissists in the rage phase also engage in what looked like moving on quickly. They'd find new supply almost immediately. They'd post about how happy they were. They'd make sure the empath knew they were doing better than ever without them. But Jung saw through this performance. The narcissist wasn't moving on. They were desperately trying to rebuild their false self as quickly as possible. The new supply wasn't a genuine connection. It was a replacement support structure. And the happiness wasn't real. It was a defense against the emptiness that was threatening to consume them. He noted that empaths often felt crushed watching the narcissist apparently thrive without them. It confirmed their worst fear, that they were the problem, that the narcissist was capable of healthy relationship, just not with them, that they weren't enough to motivate the change they'd been hoping for. But Jung would remind empaths that what they were witnessing was theater. The narcissist's false self was working overtime to project an image of strength and happiness. Meanwhile, beneath that performance, the narcissist was falling apart. The third phase Jung documented was the most revealing of all. He called it the disintegration phase. If the empath maintained complete no contact through both panic and rage, the narcissist eventually exhausted their psychological resources. They couldn't maintain the false self without the empath's support, and they couldn't rebuild it effectively with new supply because the wound had been exposed. Jung observed that this disintegration happened slowly, then all at once. The narcissist would show increasing signs of instability, difficulty maintaining their public persona, erratic behavior that confused people who'd only seen the polished version, visible deterioration in their presentation and functioning. The grandiosity would falter, the charm would slip, the confidence would reveal itself as brittle defensiveness, and beneath all of it was something the narcissist had been hiding from everyone, including themselves: profound shame, inadequacy, and terror. Jung noted that this phase confused everyone who witnessed it. The narcissist who had seemed so powerful, so together, so above it all, was suddenly falling apart. Friends would reach out to the empath, asking, "What happened? What did you do to them? They're not themselves anymore." But Jung would correct this perception. This unstable person is who the narcissist has been all along. The power was borrowed from the empath. The confidence was performance. The grandiosity was compensation for inner emptiness. You're not seeing them become someone worse. You're seeing the mask fall because they don't have the energy to hold it up anymore. During disintegration, the narcissist often turned to substance abuse, reckless behavior, or other destructive patterns, not because they were mourning the loss of the empath as a person, but because they were trying to avoid feeling the void that the empath's presence had been covering. Jung documented narcissists in this phase, sometimes attempting what looked like genuine soul-searching. They'd reach out to the empath with messages that seemed different from previous contact attempts. Messages acknowledging harm without excuses, taking responsibility without justification, expressing understanding of how their behavior affected the empath. These messages often included no requests, not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, just to be heard. And they sounded genuine in a way the narcissist's communication never had before. Before we continue, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. Jung warned empaths about these messages, because while they might represent genuine realization in the moment, they almost never indicated sustained transformation. The narcissist was having temporary clarity during their disintegration, but moments of clarity don't constitute integration. He taught empaths to distinguish between crisis insight and actual change. Crisis insight happens when defenses collapse and the narcissist briefly sees themselves clearly, but as soon as their system stabilizes, the defenses rebuild and the insight is lost, like a drunk person promising they'll never drink again while hungover, then drinking again the next weekend. Actual transformation requires sustained therapeutic work, consistent self-reflection, willingness to sit with unbearable discomfort for extended periods, and fundamental restructuring of the personality. Jung found that fewer than 5% of narcissists were willing to do this work. Most prefer to stabilize as quickly as possible and rebuild some version of their false self. They'd find new supply, establish new relationships based on identical patterns, and convince themselves this time would be different. The only difference was they'd be more paranoid, more controlling, more desperate to prevent another collapse. Jung observed something crucial during the disintegration phase. The narcissist would cycle through all three phases repeatedly, sometimes within the same day. Panic would shift to rage, would shift to disintegration, and back to panic, because their psychological structure was in complete chaos without the stabilizing force of the empath. This cycling could last months or even years, depending on how dependent the narcissist had become on the specific empath. Jung noted that the longer the relationship, the more severe the disintegration, because the narcissist had built more of their false self around the empath's participation. Throughout all three phases, Jung identified a pattern that explained the entire dynamic. The narcissist wasn't missing the empath as a person. They couldn't miss the empath as a person because they'd never actually perceived the empath as a separate person with their own reality. What the narcissist was experiencing was the loss of function. The empath had functioned as their emotional regulator, their reality anchor, their shame shield, their grandiosity confirmer. When those functions disappeared, the narcissist's entire psychological system went haywire. Jung found this truth devastating for empaths to accept. You'd given your authentic self to someone who was incapable of perceiving authenticity. You'd loved someone who couldn't love you back because they couldn't see you as separate from their needs. You'd invested years in what you thought was a mutual relationship, only to discover you were a psychological appliance being used to maintain someone else's illusion. But Jung also found this truth liberating, because it meant the empath could release all guilt about the narcissist's deterioration. You didn't cause their disintegration by leaving. You revealed that they were already disintegrated by withdrawing the support structure that was hiding it. The narcissist's collapse isn't evidence that they needed you or loved you or that you were special to them. It's evidence that their entire personality structure was unsustainable without constant external validation. They were always one withdrawal away from falling apart. You just happened to be the person whose withdrawal triggered it. Jung observed that empaths who fully internalized this shifted completely. They stopped feeling responsible for the narcissist's well-being. They stopped wondering if staying might have helped. They stopped questioning whether the narcissist could have changed if they'd just been more patient, more understanding, more something. They recognized that the narcissist's trajectory was set long before the empath arrived. Childhood trauma, attachment wounds, developmental failures, these created the narcissistic structure. The empath didn't cause it and couldn't cure it. The empath was just recruited to maintain it for a while. Jung's ultimate insight about who the narcissist becomes when the empath stops playing along was this: they become visible. Not different, not worse, not broken by the empath's departure, just visible for who they've always been beneath the performance. The panic reveals their desperation and lack of genuine emotional capacity. The rage reveals their inability to tolerate being seen as anything less than perfect. The disintegration reveals the void that narcissism was constructed to hide. None of these phases show the narcissist changing. They show progressive failure of defenses that were concealing the narcissist's actual psychological state. Jung emphasized that understanding this doesn't require forgiving the narcissist or feeling compassion for their suffering. The narcissist's childhood trauma might explain how they became this way, but it doesn't excuse the harm they caused or obligate you to help them heal. You can understand that beneath the narcissist's grandiosity is a wounded, terrified child, and still maintain that this person is dangerous to your well-being. You can recognize their pain as real and still prioritize protecting yourself from their behavior. These positions aren't contradictory, they're wisdom. The narcissist's potential journey toward healing has to happen without you, because as long as you're available to prop up their false self, they have no motivation to face what's underneath. Your presence prevents their reckoning. Your absence creates conditions where transformation becomes possible, though far from guaranteed. Jung documented that some narcissists eventually use their disintegration as a catalyst for genuine change. Years after the relationship ended, after multiple cycles of panic rage disintegration with different partners, they'd hit a bottom where maintaining the false self became more painful than facing their actual wounds. They'd enter serious therapy. They'd do the brutal work of integration. They'd slowly build something more authentic than the compensatory structure they'd been operating from, and they'd eventually become different people, more genuine, more humble, more capable of actual relationship. But Jung was clear about two things. First, this transformation was rare. Most narcissists never did the work. They cycled through the same patterns with different people until they died, always convinced the problem was everyone else. Second, even when transformation happened, it almost never benefited the empath who originally left. By the time the narcissist was genuinely different, years had passed. The empath had healed, moved on, built a new life. And Jung found that genuinely transformed former narcissists understood they had no right to re-enter that empath's life. If they reached out at all, it was without expectation, a simple acknowledgement of harm, an expression of gratitude for whatever good had existed, an honoring of the empath's choice to have no contact. These communications didn't ask for anything, because the transformed person understood they'd forfeited the right to ask. But Jung stressed, this level of transformation was the exception, not the rule. Most narcissists who seemed to transform had simply learned to hide their patterns more effectively. They'd become more covert in their manipulation, more sophisticated in their exploitation, better at performing the appearance of change without actually changing. So, if a narcissist returned after apparent transformation, Jung advised extreme skepticism, not cynicism, but healthy doubt. Because the track record shows that most claims of narcissistic transformation are just new tactics in the same old game. If you're an empath who's stopped playing along with a narcissist and you're witnessing their unraveling, Jung would tell you this: what you're seeing isn't your fault, isn't your responsibility, and isn't a reason to return. The narcissist's collapse is the natural consequence of a psychological structure that was never sustainable in the first place. You didn't break them by leaving. You revealed that they were already broken by removing the scaffolding that was hiding it. And the person you thought you were in a relationship with never actually existed. That was the false self, the performance designed to extract what the narcissist needed, while giving as little as possible in return. The real person beneath the performance is collapsing now because they don't have your support anymore. Let them collapse. That collapse is the only chance they have at potentially building something authentic eventually. Your return would only delay the inevitable and cost you more years of your life. Jung would remind you that the narcissist's transformation, should it ever happen, is not your concern. You're not abandoning someone in crisis. You're withdrawing from a dynamic that was destroying you to maintain someone else's illusion. That's not cruelty. That's self-preservation. The guilt you feel watching them fall apart is evidence of your empathy, not evidence that you should return. Your capacity to care about someone who harmed you is real and speaks to your humanity. But that capacity doesn't obligate you to sacrifice yourself. You can care about their suffering from a distance while maintaining the boundaries that protect your peace. What the narcissist becomes without you is ultimately less important than what you become without them. Because for the first time in the relationship, you get to exist as yourself rather than as a function in someone else's psychological machinery. You get to discover who you are when you're not constantly managing someone else's false self. That discovery is worth protecting, even if the narcissist is genuinely suffering, even if they're truly falling apart, even if part of you still wants to help, because the help you'd offer wouldn't heal them. It would just pause their collapse until the next time you couldn't sustain the weight. Let them become whoever they're going to become without you. Your job now is to become who you are without them, to rebuild the self you sacrificed, maintaining their facade, to reclaim the energy you spent confirming their grandiosity, to recover the years you lost serving needs that could never be satisfied. The narcissist's disintegration confirms you made the right choice. Their panic proves the relationship was never about mutual care. Their rage reveals they never saw you as a separate person. Their collapse demonstrates that the entire dynamic was unsustainable. All of it validates your decision to stop playing along. And Jung would tell you, the person you become on the other side of this is worth every moment of guilt, every wave of doubt, every pang of concern about their well-being, because you're finally, for the first time since the relationship began, becoming real. And nothing the narcissist becomes without you is more important than that. You're not responsible for their healing. You're not obligated to witness their transformation. You're not required to forgive their harm. You're free to move forward with your life while they figure out theirs. And that freedom is what you fought for when you stop playing along. The narcissist will become whoever they become. That's their journey now. Yours is to discover who you are when you're not being used as a mirror for someone else's desperate need to avoid their own reflection. And that discovery is where your real life begins. If you haven't yet, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery.